One of the things that I've started talking about is and this may be me tilting in a windmill. I think we need to put some, in classic relational database terms, standardized views so that everyone, whether it's a third-party product or homegrown, can implement these views such that for a core set of objects, maybe user and entitlement and system, I can get data out no matter what the backend is, no matter whether it's third-party provided or it's first-party provided, because that can reduce the cost of switching between vendors. It can reduce the the challenge to do bake-offs between technologies. It can facilitate people bringing their own models or buying models to look at this data to find interesting things about them. So I'm a little bit on this, what I'm lovingly calling OIDS, Open IAM Data Schema. For those of you who've been around for a long time, an OID is an object identifier, famous in LDAP land. And this came from a realization that the last time we really, as an industry, standardized data objects at rest was like INET org person and edu person. And so with love in my heart, I'm like, you know what, let's do a throwback name here. But I'm kicking that conversation off with a bunch of folks and I'm getting a lot of feedback. And it's really interesting the questions and the challenges to it. But that's like in my to-do list for the next couple of months, and then we'll see where it leads. And it may all just crash and burn. But someone may take like a ember of the remnants of it and go use it to start a fire, and that'll be great. So let's hope that happens.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing good, but it's been a hectic couple of days. I mean, 2025 is going to be a fantastic year for the podcast. We've got some great sponsor spotlight episodes. We've got our series talking about the tie between different InfoSec areas or cybersecurity areas and digital identity. And then we've just got a lot of fantastic guests lined up. So I built out the schedule pretty much all the way through April at this point, and already is shot to hell, right? Different folks have kind of said, hey, I'm not ready to do the podcast. So I've got 2 openings within the next couple of weeks, and I'm working my tail off to try to fill those openings. We might have to do the Jim and Jeff episodes.
I like those. Those are easy. Those are easy to schedule. It's just you and I. We can actually disagree on a bunch of stuff for like an hour. So yeah. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with it as well. But I think one of our secret recipe ingredients has been bringing in great guests who bring different perspectives than we do. Obviously, you and I disagree on certain things, but I can pretty much predict what those things are going to be. I like bringing in somebody new to disagree with things.
Yeah, and
or someone we've had on the show like 10 times. That's also great.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a tight-knit community here in the identity space. So obviously, if you're listening to this, you've already seen the script, you know who's going to be on. But yeah, I mean, look, we have so many people. I love talking to new people. I love talking to people who are out there in the real world doing, I call it real identity things, right? There's so much we can learn, from each other. And even if we don't have all the answers, like, let's get it out there. Maybe someone else does, or maybe someone else is struggling with those problems. So, if you're, I'll put a thing out there. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, don't hesitate to reach out. We're very friendly. It's a safe place, right? We'll take care of you. And we just like to have conversations. That's all it is. I think a lot of people maybe get intimidated. It's like, oh, it's a podcast. I'm like, okay, so what? It's just a microphone. And after about 30 seconds of talking into it, you totally forget about it. And it's just, us talking here on the web.
Yeah. What I also like to do is to get folks like our guest today, who is a thought leader. But I've kind of decided in my mind, you have to be told by somebody else that you're a thought leader. You can't declare, hey, I'm a thought leader. I'm a thought leader in this space.
I know people who do make that declaration, and
oh yeah,
sure. We all have thoughts.
This is your warning. If you have that on your LinkedIn website, go delete it immediately.
Well, I think there's a whole subreddit called LinkedIn Lunatics that is all about just the crazy LinkedIn stuff that people post. And there's some good ones on there. And thankfully, I haven't seen myself mentioned. I don't know if I would consider it a badge of honor or not to be somewhere listed in LinkedIn Lunatics, but there are definitely some lunatics that have opinions. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to go out to check out my own LinkedIn, make sure I didn't call myself a thought leader.
Maybe I nominated you and I posted something you did.
Yeah, probably. What were you doing on their site to begin with?
We keep teasing them, but let's take a minute to talk about discounts. It's never too soon to save some money. And we're excited for this discount because this is our first time actually going to this conference. It's the European Identity and Cloud Conference 2025. It's May 6th to the 9th in Berlin, Germany. It's put on by the fine folks over at Commander Cole. And they have partnered with us to give a discount code to all you fine folks listening or watching here. If you use the code IDAC25MKO, I know it rolls right off the tongue. Don't worry, it'll be in the show notes. And if I can remember, I'll put it on the graphic down here. That'll get you 25% off the registration. And Jim, you and I, for the first time, are planning on being out there. We'll be, I'm sure, trying to figure out how to do some podcasts maybe, but I'm excited. It's the first time I'll be in Berlin. Second time technically in Germany. I was in the Frankfurt airport for about 6 hours my way to India. So I'm excited to go to Berlin. And then I think maybe I'll take some time off after that conference and maybe try to explore other parts of Europe that I have not yet seen. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I'm going to go the week before. I'm definitely going to Oslo because that's where I already booked the flight. So I'm going to Oslo. Where I go from there, I'm not sure yet. But what I want to do is Identibeer in a few different cities. I'm thinking, stick to the Scandinavia region and meet as many of our listeners as possible. So as the details of those things start to formulate, what cities I want to go to, things like that, I'll be announcing that here. Also, like you mentioned, what podcasting we're going to be doing and maybe getting involved with sessions, things like that. We'll be announcing that here as well. But definitely grateful already to the folks over at Cooper & Cole for collaborating with us and making this discount available. I can say that we will not be upended with the bidder discount code. So use ours, get out there, register early while they still have the most attractive level pricing. It only goes up from here.
Yeah, show support for the show, which is always appreciated. And we're going to have Martin Cooper around here, and I think it's next week or the week after, but he's coming up here pretty soon on the show. So we'll hear more from him and maybe some about what's planned for the conference itself. So I'm looking forward to it. First time in Germany. And let's do it, man.
Yeah, man. All
right. Why don't we get to our guest? This is his 9th appearance on the show. And we were talking before we hit record here, what do you get for being, on the show, 9 times? And Jim, you're in charge of guest swag and I think jackets, SNL does 5-timer jackets. So we're up to like 9 timers. I think Andrew Shikyar is another one who's been on a bunch of times. But this is his 9th time. He's the founder and president of Weave Identity. He's one of the founders of the Digital Identity Advancement Foundation. He's one of your team members from Team Identifriends at Fido Feud at the Authenticate conference late last year. He is Ian Glazer. Welcome back to the show, Ian.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. So I got to start right off with what was your impression of Fido Feud and how that thing kind of all came together, and when can we do it again is kind of what I'm thinking already. But tell me what your perspective was as a team member on that.
As a team member, I was not prepared for the level of competitive energy coming from the other team. People who will remain nameless, who may be parts of organizations. Yeah, Megan. Wow. Lot of competitive spirit, let's say. I feel like the tequila came out too late. I feel like that would have helped earlier. And I was dumbfounded by how poor my answers were across the board. Like I was a boat anchor of answering questions, like absolutely useless. So yeah, but it's super fun. And I hope you guys bring it to more places.
Yeah, I would love to figure out how to get to more conferences. I think we're already talking about the next iteration for the Authenticate conference, later this year. Again, it'll be in Carlsbad, so stay tuned for that one.
Oh yeah.
I helped come up with the questions, and they were sent out by the Authenticate team to all the Authenticate attendees, and we got a bunch of responses back. And there were some responses that clearly had, leanings one way or the other, either politically or whatever, that I had to censor. But I was surprised at some of the answers that came out there.
Yeah.
And, the most popular answers, I think if you watch the episode, it's on YouTube. Just search Fido Feud. It's on our channel.
And you should
because it's really one of the best times I've ever had at a conference. I had so much fun hosting it. But the answers were not at all what I expected from the identity community at large. So I'm hopeful that we can make it bigger and better next time. But I just had such a blast with it. And,
I just have a thought, which is ID Pro is releasing their skill survey questionnaires, just going out now. I wonder if there's like an IDAC ID Pro team up here where we can take the questions from last year's Identity Feud and actually fold some of that stuff into this skill survey. Like we should talk about this with Heather and Andy. Like that would be super cool. See, like just as an interesting sort of interlude, like, here's some like kind of simple questions in theory, simple questions, and wow, wildly different answers. So like that could be fun.
I think I'd be up for that. Heather or Andy, if you guys are listening, hit me up. Let's figure out how to do it. We can make it fun. I think that's one of the fun things about stuff like this space is just when you think you have it figured out, some question like this comes up and it's like, whoa, I didn't even think about that. Where did that come from?
For sure.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that's been going on. I guess let's talk about 2024, kind of recap it here. I know you're at a lot of different conferences, but how did 2024 go overall? What do you think? Did you have any big sort of identity epiphanies or, I don't know, things like that?
It was a blur of a year. Like I still haven't recovered my sense of time from COVID, right? I don't know about you guys, but like, yeah, that's still like mushy. And I feel like a lot of velocity in a lot of different directions. I still don't quite understand what's going on in the market, but like highlights for me, the shared signals framework interops. I didn't catch the one in London. I did catch the one at Gartner in Dallas in December. Identiverse, there was some stuff there too. It was like, that's really great to see the real push, I think, right now between SSF and CAPE and Risk. That's super cool. What else? I think there's a lot of new energy. There's a lot of new players. I keep learning about companies like literally every day, it feels like. It's like, how many people can, come into this market and come at it with like a real genuine energy to like do something different. And I think that's healthy and that's really good for the market. It was good as my first full year on my own, like full calendar year as, just a one-man show, to see the kinds of companies that are out there, what they're doing, be able to help where I could, be able to just see trends. So like it was a good year, but man, it went fast.
Yeah. Time flies, I think, when you're having fun, which hopefully that's what's taking place more often than not.
Yeah, for sure.
What conferences are you planning on hitting this year? Will we see you at EIC?
So I will definitely be at EIC. This year's a little bit different for me. So I think I'm going to do, for sure, EIC. I haven't been to RSA in a long time, so I'm going to go back there. I've never done Black Hat. I'm going to check that out.
Black Hat's fun. I've done that a couple times.
I'm probable, let's say, for maybe the Gartner conferences this year, but there's one that's not going to be on my list, and that's Identiverse this year.
Oh, man.
Well, look, I feel like I can miss a CIS/Identiverse once every 10 years. This is like sort of time. It's my 20th anniversary. We're going hiking. Like, see ya. Like, so I'll be on a trail somewhere when the conference is going on, which it bums me out, but I'm still going to do all of my content committee review work, which I need to go do before Andy and Nishant beat me up. That's the kind of the first half of the year. And then I'm not sure really the second half. It's been a long time since I've been to an IIW. I really should change that. And I am, Jim, you just triggered this thought. I'm going to be at one of the Identibeers. And in fact, I'm going to be at the Identibeer next week in London. Now, I know this show won't air until probably after that. So if you're hearing this now, then you've already had a beer with me in London, because obviously you would go to Identibeer in London.
Or you're about to. So I think I think this is going to go out on the next Monday, so it'll be the 13th.
Yeah. All right. So then you have 2 days. Now that you're hearing this, in 3 days' time, in Thursday, I'll be at the Identibeer, and I'm really excited just to see some people that I know and I haven't seen in a while, but more importantly, like see a whole new group of people I have no idea who they are, and just meet them and understand what they're up to. And I will be coming right off the plane, so I am going to fall asleep in a pint. It'll be great. I'm sure there'll be photos, but I'm really excited for it. Like it's about, another opportunity to meet more of the community, which is gonna be great.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Now, your conference schedule is pretty busy, and you've been to these for a long time, as you've mentioned. What's something that, I guess, your assessment of the scene today? How do you see IAM conferences? Have you noticed any evolution maybe within the last couple of years? Is it? I feel like a couple of years ago it was all right, everything's zero trust, and then it was. Maybe before that, it was everything was blockchain. And then it was, AI is kind of like the thing right now. Like we see these waves coming through, but I'm curious kind of like, what's your assessment of where IAM conferences at large are kind of at right now?
So I think my take is not so much thematic in terms of like what, conferences are sort of choosing as their themes. I think it's more about a little bit more meta, which is, I think that last year certainly was more evidence of the fact that identity is becoming more and more mainstream. It's a mainstream concern for more parts of the enterprise and certainly within the security organization. And so one of the things we're seeing is that people that are coming to conferences are first timers for those conferences. Identiverse, Andy always asks like, who's, first time is this to Identiverse? Half the room raises their hand. And I would posit that a third to half the people that raise their hand for that question are new to identity. Same basic thing happened at Gartner IAM in Dallas in December. So we're seeing a lot of new faces, and we're seeing a lot of new beginning practitioners, people that have done their career in security in other places and now coming to identity. And I think that's really great. One of the side effects is that I think we've already seen this, and it will continue to happen. Most conferences are needing to orient to those people, right? And so there's a lot that can be taught, and yet still we can get better at teaching it about identity. And there's always emergent topics. That's important. I think one of the side effects is that it's going to get harder for conferences to put more content on that's longer and more technical. I have a feeling just because of who's going to be there that we're going to see a kind of different optimization for content in the majority, like in the sort of, let's say, main stage identity conferences. It'll be interesting to see where some of the longer term, the more difficult, the more challenging identity problems continue to be discussed. Obviously, IIW is one of those kinds of places. EIC, I think, does a good job in this. I think Authenticate is starting to find its legs and its voice in this regard. But it'll be interesting to see that emergence of conferences that are tending towards the more mainstream identity topics and practitioners, and then places where people can have the harder conversations, the more in-depth, the more, I would say, nuanced conversations about, like, you've got a 3 to 5 year problem over millions of identities. What does that start to look? Where do those conversations happen? Who's participating? And how do we foster more of that?
Yeah, that's a lot of good thoughts. I wanted to echo something you said earlier when you talked about 2024 with all the new vendors that you're seeing, and there's a ton of innovation. And when I talk to other practitioners, they talk about things like this massive amount of identity data that they want to be able to use to automate provisioning tasks. So go back to the nuts and bolts, but do it in a way that leverages this data that they have. And you're starting to see solutions that actually are things that put them in control and give them the ability to do that. So I kind of get the sense that those are the companies that could shape the future. We've seen it happen a couple of times within the last 20 years where incumbents, I don't know if they get fat, slow, and lazy or what the case is, right? Maybe that's a little too harsh, but young, hungry companies come and eat their lunch. And I wonder if we're at an inflection point for that again.
I think 2024 was good evidence that we are seeing, on one hand, a return to the best of platform days that we saw in identity. We've seen it 2 other times. One was basically CA and IBM and a little bit of BMC. It was like, who's got the most complete, essentially, suite of identity? We saw it again, and that was a moment in time. We saw it again with Oracle and Sun. Now we're seeing it again, and it's Okta, SailPoint, Ping, maybe CyberArk, Entra, and we have these best of sort of suite platform type things. But at the same time, every time we saw one of those movements towards a best of suite or best of platform, we also saw a huge influx of new identity vendors coming out with novel ways to approach problems or augmenting some of those more traditional suites to give them more innovative features without replacing them entirely, a better together kind of strategy. And I think that's what's going to continue in 2025 is this kind of tension towards some incumbent vendors that are getting super, super large from a sort of footprint inside of IAM, customer base as well, and a bunch of new folks coming in and saying, yes, but they're missing a bunch of things. We can't claim that we're going to displace your 10-year-old SailPoint installation or what have you. But what we can do is add these capabilities to it. That's going to help reduce your burden, make you more efficient, get you better integrated with security, what have you. I think there's a whole influx of that's going to happen in 2025. We'll start to see that in the market shortly.
So I want to talk about something that you published last year, which to me, I loved it because it's like, nobody asked for this. I'm just going to put it out there. It's kind of a mini series blog. You broke it up into a few different parts, but the idea was you were kind of laying out that the argument that modern identity architectures need to be or are different. You kind of talked about almost what I would call a reference architecture or some of the major themes that make up this modern identity architecture. Originally, I think it was 4 principles or 4 layers, if you will.
Yep.
I think you're evolving it, which just goes to show. I mean, to me, that's what it should be, right? Otherwise, it's going to be thrown out there and die on the vine. You're evolving it, but kind of the 5 principles that I've heard you talk about anyway: policy, data, orchestration, execution, and events. Did I describe that right? I mean, is that...
Yeah. Let me paint the picture, which is that I last year had 2 things I realized. One is that the names of the markets that we have within identity don't make any sense anymore, right? Case in point, access management. Is access management single sign-on? Is it
used to be
authorization? Isn't it the teams that field the tickets from ServiceNow that then go build people's accounts? Isn't that managing access? Like, what the heck do these words mean? And access management is not the only one where you're like, I don't understand what's in this bucket. Like, I don't understand what the feature boundaries are of these markets anymore. It's super, super blurry. Part 1. Part 2 is I don't know where the IAM market is going per se, but I'm starting to see sort of evidence that there's a foot race going on towards some form of a enhanced data tier. We can talk a little bit more about that, informed by more robust and contextual policy, powered by real-time events. And that, by the way, does not fit neatly into the identity security bucket or any damn bucket, right? So I'm like, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to write everything out of my head that I've got swirling around, because what I think I'm seeing is an emergent architecture for what we should be heading towards that acknowledges the realities of an identity team. And one of those realities is you don't replace major constituents in your architecture very often. Once a decade, you change out your IDP. Once a decade, you change out your IGA. And if you've got different kinds of needs that the business is bringing to you, like case in point, if you need FAPI support, your IDP may not have that. Are you going to throw out that IDP? Heck no, because it's doing SSO for like a gazillion things, plus all your OAuth brokering. What you might do is augment it with a specialized solution that has it. Well, all of a sudden, now you find yourself that's an identity fabric. How the hell is this all going to work together? And so I started just writing, like just getting it all out. And I thought it was going to be a short piece. That was a lie, I told myself. And so one of the things that's in there is a notional reference architecture, and it talks about those 5 components that you mentioned, and describes the interplay between them as this is where I think we're headed from an architectural perspective.
Who did you write the documents or the blogs for?
I just needed to get it out of my head, right?
Really, it's for you, right, Ian? It's kind of like thinking out loud.
A lot of, look, I have found in my career that I'm only smart in the presence of other people. Like, I need other people to critique and push back and comment on and nudge to actually produce anything. And so I was like, look, I'm going to get this crap out there, and then people are going to beat it up, and then someone's going to pick up a piece of this thing and run with it, and it's going to be better. Like, let's just do that. So in some regards, yes, I wrote it for architects. I wrote it for product managers also. Like, I always sort of write for myself in that regard of like, hey, like, how should I be thinking about the next 3 years of where I want to take my product? If I'm a product owner or product manager, and if I'm in large enterprise, like, same thing. Like, I've got a whole bunch of piece parts. How the heck is this all going to work together? And how is that architecture going to be stressed in the coming years? And what should I think about as I keep going forward? So I didn't write it for a single persona. I wrote it for people that were just genuinely curious and could find something in there that they could use. Maybe not the whole thing. That's fine. I just wanted to get some ideas out there.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms, like, you used a great example. What is access management? But as you think about what we have been doing for a living for the last 20 plus years, it's identity and access management. Well, now how do you even define that to people when you say, what is access management? But I think that is the underpinning or the under churn of what we're doing here, which is these definitions are constantly changing. There's identity access management, there's digital identity. What is it now? Is it identity security? Is that just a buzz term, or is that actually something real? And that's not a question for you. I'm just talking out loud.
So Jim, my reaction to that was like, let's focus on the outcomes that the things that I have can have, right? So like, I've got these pieces of things in my identity infrastructure. What outcomes can I achieve with them? And I've been trying to drive to like, focus on the outcomes that you want the architecture to have or your infrastructure to have. And then we can give those things names or not. It doesn't matter. And if you're using a tool in kind of a funny way, but it scratches the itch, it reaches that outcome, who's to say that's wrong? Like, I think we got to get away from some of the sort of strictly bucketed market terminology and start thinking about like, what do we need to get done? What is the most efficient way for me, this organization, given the constraints we have, to get that done, get that achieved?
Well, let's not forget the most important thing here. It needs to have another acronym, and it needs to conflict with something else within the identity space.
I'm not a barbarian. Of course we need something that's utterly confusing and conflicting. Of course.
It's got to it's got to be catchy so that everybody can say, now includes more modern identity architecture.
To be fair, David Birch said I should have called the architecture dope. I'm like, yeah, but that's like the 80s calling, and like that I have like control SA nightmares when you start doing that. And so like, I don't think that's super cool, but
everything's just a cycle, Ian. It's dope. And then you have the bell bottom principle, right? We have to figure out how that works into IAM. And then classic rock like Nirvana, which, that makes you feel old.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be cool. And by the time you're like, oh, turn the music down, that's when it'll be cool again.
I think we can agree classic rock is music from the 70s. Everything else is not classic rock.
I agree with that.
I'm with you. That's a platform.
But here's the thing. I mean, the 70s are like a billion years ago, and it's like me in the 70s thinking like, oh my God, like Glenn Miller is the classic rock of like my grandparents' generation. Like, oh God, what does this mean for me? Anyway, sorry. I digress. We went way off with that one. Sorry, whoops.
No, I wanted to make sure that these 5 elements, are they layers of this, like a reference architecture, or is there just too much blurring to call it layers?
I refer to them as layers. And, I sort of start with policy as the first one. Like, it's the backdrop, right? We are awash in our enterprises in policy, both sort of business rules, but also the technical ones. And we know them well in identity, right? There are provisioning policies. Who's supposed to get what? What are the attributes we need to set? Like, it's the configurations in our SSO tools. Like, we recognize those things. But one of the realizations I had was, traditionally speaking, our identity products only could describe policies and knew about data that they could interact with through their execution layer. So if I was a provisioning product, the data I knew about was things that I had a connector for, and I could write policies about those things. In the modern era, I want to describe a policy that says, well, before you go accessing production Azure instance, there's got to be a ServiceNow ticket open in your name, referencing the specific Azure account that we need to go talk to. You need to be coming from a managed product or a managed laptop. It needs to be fully patched. And then if all those things are true, and we're not in the last days of the quarter, then get this ephemeral role that I want to assign to your access and let the IDP do that. And then it will go away when things are done. That's not the kind of policy you could write in a traditional system. It is 100%, however, the kind of policy that if you step away from the technology, what people want to have as outcomes, what they want to put in place in their enterprises, but they got to jury rig it between 5 different technologies that don't talk. Like, this only gets worse when you realize, well, how many components are in my identity architecture, like in my infrastructure? How do I coordinate that stuff? So policy is the backdrop, right? That is that pervasive layer, and it will be tiered. And I know that's a hard topic in and of itself. And I don't want to make light of it, because the more I talk to people at large enterprise, they're saying, I, as an identity team, want to describe a set of guardrails. The people that are actually doing the identity work in terms of implementing systems that consume identity services, they're at the edge. They've got their own rules because they're closest to the application. How do I make this coherent? How do I link these things? I don't have good answers to that yet. But I acknowledge that, like, this is still a place that we can do better. And I think it's actually an interesting opportunity legitimately for AI. I'm just not sure how yet. Like create a policy from natural language, blah, blah, blah. That's boring. I mean, like, real interesting use of AI. I just haven't seen it yet.
Well, I think that's like what you just described is like nirvana, right? It's a whole bunch of like if-then statements, and that forms your policy of when you're allowed to do things. And I say this with all due respect, I love it. I just don't see it happening anytime soon for even half of the organizations out there with IAM stuff, because it takes so long for organizations to invest in technology. They're going to need probably a couple different tools to do that. They're going to need good data, right, to do sort of things like that. And, for every cutting edge Google, Microsoft, Apple, TikTok, PayPal, right, whoever it may be who is really cutting edge of IAM, there are 100, 1,000 times more companies who are still getting a fax to get somebody onboarded.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it sounds cool. It sounds neat. And then I feel like pessimistic about like, well, that's 10, 15 years ago, realistically, for most companies to aspire to that, if they even get that far. Help me talk me off the ledge, because I love the idea of it. I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
So I think there's 2 things that might give you hope to carry on. Like, I didn't realize that we're doing this as like It's the Wonderful Life edition of
This is therapy. I am therapy with Ian.
So 2 things to consider. One is standards help us build a better identity fabric and allow for orchestration between components. And I think that's really important. Things like shared signals is one of those things that I think is really, really important to help us here, both respond more dynamically, closer to the incident, closer to whatever that decision-making moment is. And that that allows us to put smaller components into our identity architecture without upsetting the apple cart, right? So if you've got a lot of sort of tech inertia because of whether it's on-prem legacy that you want to migrate, but that's a 5-year project and that's what we're doing and we're going to go knock it down, or you've just got sort of basic components to begin with, you still have an opportunity to add fit for purpose components, essentially capabilities. I still think that's true. What you might lack is the staffing to be able to operate it. What you might lack is a seat at the table that says, hey, security, you've got a bunch of requirements here that you keep pushing on application teams. Like, for example, they've got to be coming from, I want a full ZTNA type situation, and I want this MFA done. You're doing all these things, but all of those controls are disjoint, and they're not actually been sort of laid out together because they have to really run in parallel in a lot of ways. And I think this is an opportunity for, to me, what Gartner would call identity first security. They really hate the identity security term. It's really entertaining to watch them kind of go off on that. Of just how do we make our security controls and our identity controls first and foremost in that sort of set of security controls and orchestrate that to happen. One side of it. The other side of it is, one of the trends we're seeing is that people are building data tiers that are considering more than just one flavor of data, right? It used to be my IGA tool had admin time data. What could I write a connector for, pull data back, provision back out again, right? And our access management tool knew about systems it was connected to and who attempted to create a session. Did we create that session? When did we log that person out? Never the two shall meet, right? Like totally siloed data. Now we're starting to see people say, let's bring those sets of data together. Let's bring those things together and then be able to have signal information. So say shared signals framework from things like our EDR. Starting to facilitate this thing where now you've actually got the data you can reason against, even if you're writing basic policies. The thing that I struggle with is it is bananas. If you look at someone's identity architecture, each component in their architecture, their IGA, their PAM, their SSO, who knows what else they've got in there, their specialized MFA, each one of them has their own data repository. I guarantee you that like 20 to 30% of the data in each one of those things is duplicated with one other component, if not all of them. How on earth are we supposed to operate this monster if we're not all reading from the same page? And so one of the tenets I say in modern IAM is a unified data tier that everything in the fabric can pull from and use at least as a system of record and bring proper data management practitioners to this conversation, as opposed to us IAM people being like, cool, I know what I'm doing down here in the data tier. You don't. You just don't, right? Data governance is a real thing. Let's bring those practitioners into this story.
All right, let me try to swing it back to the positive side because you sparked a couple thoughts in my head. One is there a catch-up point here or a level skip or whatever we want to call it where we say, okay, yeah, maybe we missed the boat on IGA, over the last 10 years. But if we adopt this mindset, this modern architecture, this modern identity kind of thinking, is there an opportunity for organizations to maybe miss that boat to skip ahead to, hey, you know what? We've got some new tools that are coming out. We're better at our data. Maybe we're more organizationally sound when it comes to, how we collect that kind of stuff and store it. Maybe I don't need all those other components that at that point might be considered more legacy. Is there an opportunity for that?
I think there is an opportunity. I think it's around taking to heart where you can, where it's most impactful, zero standing privilege. Leave aside the plumbing, leave aside all the things that I actually talked about in those blog pieces, and focus on where do we have the opportunity to use ephemeral access? And can we describe what the appropriate access is for a certain job function? So a production instance break glass scenario. What do developers need in stage? What do they need in test? And where systems, and increasingly, especially our cloud ones, do facilitate ephemeral access. So you get something assigned at the beginning of your session, and when that session's over, it goes away. Holding tight to that as a goal, I think will have sort of knock-on effects of like, okay, cool, I can do that in these environments. Now, how do I better describe the rules of the game here? Where should my control points be? I think it leads to better conversations in places that don't facilitate ZSP as easily or ephemeral access as easily. That's places to then take a really sharp eye and look at it and say, is this the place where we need to do more role engineering, more QARs, what have you, and really like focus the scope of where we're doing more heavyweight traditional IAM and start to find pieces, critical systems, cloud systems, what have you, to actually try to bite off some of the ZSP concepts and start to develop that muscle there. And I think there really is an opportunity for kind of a catch up there, because we're now increasingly finding high impact systems that do facilitate it. That means you don't have to bring all the tools of the last decade to bear. You actually can do this differently, lighter weight, easier to audit, more effective.
I can see why you broke this into multiple blogs rather than just one blog and lay out
I'm threatening to glue them all back together and make like an ebook that, I don't know, I'll print out for my mom or something. I'm not sure what I'm doing with it.
So you talked about policy. I had a bunch of follow-up questions, but I think we should keep pace. You went into data. Talked about data lake earlier. I even had just a foundational question of like, okay, what is identity data? You actually started a whole piece around what is identity data. I have always kind of felt like there's the black and the white, and then there's the gray in between. There's information like transactions that Ian did on Amazon. Those are not identity data. There's Ian's credentials to log into Amazon. That's identity data. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, like billing address and other things that maybe they're application specific, but they could contribute to, Ian lives in this part of the world and things like that. We can make some identity decisions based on it. What I'm finding as I talk to more identity practitioners is that they want to solve their business specific identity and access issues with data that matters to them. If they're, say in the insurance industry or something like that, maybe there's some data elements that come from other systems that they can make access decisions on.
Yep.
Do you see that's, I kind of feel like that is enabling that type of approach is something that technology vendors are starting to say, all right, well, there's all these different use cases that are specific to not only industries, but specific to clients. We're not going to try to solve them all. We're going to give you the platform to build it from. And it's not only, maybe it's just not even like a technology or product thing to solve. Maybe it's, it's just building a platform. So I guess like turning all that into a question is, what were you talking about with
what were you thinking?
Data? what the heck were you thinking?
So two things. One is I wrote about this not in the same series, but a post which is a probably bad idea, which talks about workforce identity data platforms. Get that in a sec. In the consumer world, and I'm not talking about consumer IAM just, I'm talking about in the consumer world, you have data platforms called customer data platforms, CDPs. It's its own market. And it consumes all manner of data, everything from clickstream analytics on websites to email open statistics to self-provided preference information. I'm into these colors, these styles, what have you. All of that goes into a CDP. And arguably, all of that then is used to build better customer journeys and experiences. And so if you are on a major e-commerce site, you are very much have information that is now in a CDP somewhere. the credential that you use to log in, let's say it's a social credential, that's also interesting. So in my mind, I've always had the attitude of the data that is associated to you, the consumer. CDPs are designed to do these things from a data management perspective, and then the ability to reason across it and make decisions across it and then affect change in it. How you authenticate to the site is a thin wedge of that information that an identity team is responsible for. But they shouldn't be the data custodians for the entire CDP. They don't own the CRM. Like, that would be crazy to think about that. But the notion of a CDP that takes all these different kinds of data in terms of different velocities of data, structures of data, and puts them together so that you can actually build a better customer experience, that's really cool. So then I took that idea. I was like, what if we did that for workforce? This is a horrible idea. And I kept going through like how horrible of an idea it is. Like, I'm going to throw what training classes you've got in there. And I'm going to throw your 360 surveys. Like, I'm going to throw everything in that pot.
And not to I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, and I am, but are you talking about like taking copies of the training data and throwing it in your lake, or are you just pointing to it?
Well, so here's the beautiful thing is that, and this is why we need more data management professionals in conversations with identity practitioners, is that things like lakehouse architectures can do reference without copy for massive data sets. Like, I didn't really learn this until I was at Salesforce for a couple of years and looking at how they're building their CDP and the ability to do zero copy, but on the, petabytes of data. You're like, holy crap, like, blew my mind. I got my start as an Oracle sales engineer, like good old relational tables in Oracle 7, man, the world is a really different place. And if you're listening to this and you take one thing from this, is go find your data management practitioners, because they're fascinating and the things they can do are fascinating. So I think it's reference, not copy. But you may copy for a variety of reasons. One of which, guys, you know this, how much in the customers that you have and the work that you do is dealing with data quality issues. And you find those data quality issues, and what are you left to do? Go to the upstream system and be like, hey, can you change this? Because your use of like street is just all baffled and weird, and it's causing all sorts of problems. That's not a conversation that often goes well. So it's left to the identity team while they're marshaling data to fix these things. So there's actually some legitimate reason why you do want to copy some of this stuff so you can improve its data quality. And so long way around, very long way around, I think there is an opportunity to bring together a variety of different kinds of information, whether it's copy or reference. That's the data management team's decision. But whether that is workforce and workforce related training information, those kinds of things. Plus, why don't we bring in other kinds of information? And that leads to the conversation of like, should this thing be its own? Should it be its own identity lake? Or is it part of your security data lake, closer to things like IP intelligence, other threat information, zero trust telemetry, things like that? And now identity has its components in there that it can reason across.
Yeah, some of it's going to be log data. Some of it's going to be resident in some system.
For sure.
Some of it's going to be third-party data that you can only get through an API.
Yeah, all of those things. And this is the important part. I've talked to organizations who have built these things, either inside of their security data lakes or on their own. They are a rare breed of organization, right? To, the person who's like, I'm barely holding it down as it is. I'm not building a data lake for this identity stuff. Are you kidding? I think what we're going to see, and the market is showing us this, is that vendors are coming now and saying, we can at least combine different kinds of identity data, admin time data, runtime data, event time data, and give you a better, wider view of the playing field, the ability to affect controls better. So I think there's this democratization going on. And yeah, some set of companies are going to go out there and build these things. We're starting to see vendors who are saying, we're doing that for you, but no one's going to buy that. No one is buying one of these things. What they're buying is, I need to be better about my IGA practices. I need to be better about my standing access. Oh, by the way, the thing that's powering it is this really cool data tier. Don't worry about it right now. In a couple of years, you'll be ready to start doing other things with it. That's the hope I have for the market.
So the third layer was orchestration.
Yep.
And, it's kind of funny because as I was reading through this, I kept thinking back to Strata. Strata's a company that does a lot of what you're talking about, like policy orchestration and other types of orchestration. I do think a lot of these terms is kind of funny because I was thinking policy could be these technical policies, or they could be your infosec policy. Data could be not when you talk about who has access to what, it's the what. The data is the what that you have access to, but there's also this whole identity data concept. Orchestration could be the orchestration of, these identity systems, and you have legacy identity systems, you have modern identity systems. How do you hook them all up so you can achieve full integration without just wiping out everything every time you want to do something new? But it also could be orchestration of workflows. But you're talking about, I think, more the first type that I talked about, right? Which is orchestrating modern and legacy identity systems.
I would think about it this way so you've got this data tier. You then need to evaluate and take action based on either changes in it or discoveries in that information. And so that could be everything from a classic provisioning policy to a ITSM ticket classic workflow ticket flow. Could also be hey, I'm the IDP. We are using XYZ MFA provider. I need you to go actually challenge this user, right? So I think there's lots of different kinds of orchestration. It doesn't need to be massively complex. It can be, but I actually think a lot of it is just the basics of how do I evaluate policy based on some changes in information and data? And then what do I need to go tell to go do something? Like, what's my execution layer that I want to go reach out to and nudge it along to take an action? So it can start very, very simple. Most people have these things in their IGA tools. In fact, I would argue they all do. But you even have it in your IDPs and your PAM systems. That's just an acknowledgement that the real value in a lot of our systems comes from that orchestration layer. As complicated or as simplistic as it is, that's the thing that really is doing the heavy lifting.
So you have, we went policy, data, orchestration, execution. I think the execution is kind of these domains of identity, IAM technologies. It's the single sign-on platform. It's the IGA, PAM. Is that right?
Not quite, but it's close. Think of it as the execution layer is the interface between your IAM architecture and the applications that you actually want to go manage access with it. And so that is your provisioning connector lives in the execution layer. Your SSO configuration, effectively, like the brokerage of a SAML flow, that's an execution layer example. We used to pay for stuff in that layer. Like, we used to buy connectors. Like, that's crazy to me. Like, the execution layer should be free. And increasingly, as you have integration platforms as a service, that's not quite the right abbreviation, but essentially there's whole businesses out there that are like, we can basically give you a unified API surface over everything you got out there. So I can trigger a create user or an update record anywhere you want. That's not fun. Like, that's not the IAM business anymore. Like, you shouldn't be paying for that. But it's where identity, the orchestration, meets the real world. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Okay. The last one that you had, and I don't think this was part of the original framework of layers, was events. And I think you kind of teased us a little bit in the beginning, talking about how we're moving toward more of a real-time event type of environment. So recognizing things as they're happening, some of those things are going to be attacks, right?
Well, yes. And think about it this way. Identity systems traditionally is a piano with about 5 keys: join, move, leave, log in or verify, log out. But no one ever plays the log out key. Like, that never happens. So we have 4 notes that we can play. We are not going to be the most popular keyboardist in the town, right? Our ability to affect controls was significantly limited by the events that we could actually instrument: join, move, leave, log in or verify. Event time identity totally changes that, because now what we can say is, look, an application out there says, hey, I have my own inbuilt transactional fraud system built into me, and I just terminated a user session because it was super weird. basically shared signals framework is Twitter for apps. It's like, hey, I'm just going to shout into the void. I did a thing. I terminated this session for this data subject because that was weird. I don't know what's going on. Maybe someone out there wants to take an action about that, but I don't have to know about it. I, as the application, don't have to know about who my IDP is or my IGA system. I simply say, I terminated a session because of broad. Now I can pull that information in and say, oh, now what do I want to do if I see these kinds of things? Let's go find the data subject. Let's go tell the IDP, terminate all their sessions. Meanwhile, let's go change maybe more dynamically their zero trust from a network perspective. Let's sequester them. Let's do these other things. Like, it gives us this opportunity to bring our controls to bear in more places than just join, move, leave, verify. That's hugely important.
I mean, more than that, I think it's an opportunity to be almost creative with events and what are things that we can do with, the data that we have available to us? What are things we haven't thought of or maybe couldn't do before, right? I think this is a real opportunity to say, hey, this shouting into the void thing is great. What if you had a very specific app or function or whatever it is that's looking for this very specific thing? It's available now. And it's
yes, and the other side of it is the things that generate signals. Now, if you're the kind of organization that has data scientists on board and AI scientists, you can actually start to build models that look at this data tier and be like, hey, I've noticed something weird. I'm going to emit a signal. And now we can take action on that immediately versus I'm waiting for my HR trigger to add a new user to the system. Like, it's really interesting what these things open up. By the way, I feel like we're late to the game, right? Security has had much more dynamic sets of controls, not limited to, I only do something when the user boots their laptop, right? Welcome to the party, identity. Like, now we can actually work in concert with security controls because we can act on the same cadence. We can act with the same velocity they do. That's hugely important.
I kind of feel like that's the idea that we're going for with identity security. It's just hard to put a definition around identity security because anytime you're talking about identity, it gets into something. Oh yeah, that's identity security. So Ian, with this framework, where do you take it from here? I mean, are you going to continue to evangelize this, or are you looking for the community to kind of start to pick it up? And you've done so many things, by the way. Like, you started a lot of organizations.
Yeah, Jim, did you just give me the "what have you done for us lately" question? I just want to check.
I didn't want it to sound that way, but it did.
Ian, you're doing way too much. You're giving us stuff we're not asking for, man. Come on.
So.
No. Oh God!
All right, we'll get it back on rails. All right. So here's what I want to do. Like, I do want to keep talking about this. Like, next week, I'm going to go visit an enterprise and unpack some of these thoughts a little bit more. This is an absolutely leading edge organization in terms of identity, and more it's about conversations of just like, this is how I'm thinking about it. How are you thinking about it? Like, it's just going to refine my own thinking. I think it's really beneficial. Maybe I can help them too. I really hope so. One of the things that I want to do from this is I'm really enamored with this data tier thing. And the more I talk to people that have done it and have brought real data practitioners into the story and why they're doing it, like, it's fascinating to me. And one of the things that I've started talking about is and this may be me tilting in a windmill. I think we need to put some, in classic relational database terms, standardized views so that everyone, whether it's a third-party product or homegrown, can implement these views such that for a core set of objects, maybe user and entitlement and system, I can get data out no matter what the backend is, no matter whether it's third-party provided or it's first-party provided, because that can reduce the cost of switching between vendors. It can reduce the the challenge to do bake-offs between technologies. It can facilitate people bringing their own models or buying models to look at this data to find interesting things about them. So I'm a little bit on this, what I'm lovingly calling OIDS, Open IAM Data Schema. For those of you who've been around for a long time, an OID is an object identifier, famous in LDAP land. And this came from a realization that the last time we really, as an industry, standardized data objects at rest was like INET org person and edu person. And so with love in my heart, I'm like, you know what, let's do a throwback name here. But I'm kicking that conversation off with a bunch of folks and I'm getting a lot of feedback. And it's really interesting seeing the questions and the challenges to it. But that's like in my to-do list of the next couple of months, and then we'll see where it leads. And it may all just crash and burn. But someone may take like a ember of the remnants of it and go use it to start a fire, and that'll be great. So let's hope that happens.
I'm thinking Oids, and now I'm thinking about the old, I think it was Domino's Pizza, the Noid.
Noid.
Do you remember
Avoid the Noid. Yeah. So I did think about that. We're all of similar age on that one. I'll let you explain it to the listeners what the Noid was, and put that in the show links, like the Wikipedia article for Noid.
The 80s were a weird time for commercials, so just put it that way.
Yeah.
Look, there's so much to unpack here, and here's what I would recommend is, look, we're gonna have in our show notes the link to the articles that you've written here. I would read those, definitely, and then I would listen to this, or maybe vice versa, depending whichever one comes first, because I think there's a lot to unpack here, and I love the discussion that you started, and I think you've turned some of this as well into some talks maybe given like Identiverse, or maybe it was Gartner, can't remember which one, where you've started to kind of posit this. And I love this idea of theory crafting, right? Hey, here's some ideas we have to solve some of the problems that we're seeing. What do we think? Many heads are better than one. So I would definitely encourage people to check it out. I also want to ask about one thing I noticed on your LinkedIn when I was, doing some cyber stalking of you before you joined the show. You recently became a faculty member for IANS.
Yep, the IANS Institute.
Yeah, so tell me about this. First of all, not everyone may be familiar. What is IANS? And then what are you teaching?
Yes, faculty is an interesting word too. So IANS Institute has been around for quite some time, and I knew it as a place where really kick-ass security practitioners would teach classes, could do consulting engagements, could actually just engage directly with an enterprise to answer a question. And a while ago, a friend of mine, who's one of those absolute kick-ass security folk, was like, hey, you should totally become a faculty member. Let me do the intro. And I went through the evaluation process. And I got to say, it's the opportunity to do calls with enterprise customers who are having challenges and just be able to see if I can help. Kind of brought me back to my Burton days. And like, I love it. It's like a way just to kind of play stump the chump. Like they've got a rando question, which I love doing, and like seeing if I can help. But also it's just destiny because it's literally my institute. So obviously I have to be a member of it. So, there's that.
That's actually a pretty good segue. You just kind of say, hey, this is my thing. I'll take it over now.
Yeah. I'm not charging you for likeness fees. It's cool.
I like the idea of the whole stump the chump, trying to trick the professor, ask the questions, and hopefully, there's answers. If there's not, let's figure it out together. I think those are when you learn the most. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't know about that. Let me go look at that, because I feel like whether you've been in any industry or any topic, right, there's always something new to learn. And I know, Jim, you're very fond of saying sharpening the saw. So there's
look, if you want to learn something, teach it.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to really know something, put yourself in a position to teach someone else about it, and then you'll know whether you know it or not.
So I gave and this sparks my memory from today. I actually gave a class today to a bunch of auditors on IAM 101, right? What should auditors be looking at from an identity perspective? So sorry for the IAM teams who are now dealing with smarter auditors. There are people too. But the idea was like, hey, you know what? Let's level set here. What is that we're doing? And it give me an opportunity to get on soapboxes like, hey, auditors, stop telling your organizations to change your password every 90 days. Like, that's old guidance from like 5-10 years or 7 years ago now, probably somewhere in that area. Time to get with it, man. So it gives me an opportunity to maybe do a little influencing on some of the areas that I think, organizationally things do. But I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. I'm not a technical expert and deep and everything, but I know certain things, and I do enjoy the teaching aspect of it. I think if you've got the opportunity to share knowledge, and maybe we do with this podcast or other things, go for it. It's great. All right, I have a lighter note question. If you could teach anything, doesn't have to be identity related, what would you teach?
Does this have to be something that I know today, or I could learn and then teach it?
Oh, you know what? That's a good spin. Either one. That's fine.
So I would love to teach music theory. I don't know really the first thing about it. I mean, I played an instrument in junior high and high school and what have you, but I'd love to teach as it would force me to learn about music theory and like how the construction of music comes about and what are the sort of basic tenets for it. If it's something I do know, I don't really know much. I don't know. I think I'm going to fall back on the, like, let's just go with the, I'm going to learn music theory and I'm going to teach it.
I like that. Oh, that's good. Jim, what would you teach if you could teach anything?
So I've been able to think about this question for about an hour because
I sprung it on all of us at the last minute here.
Yeah. And so I originally thought like, oh, you can't just go and say identity and access management or developing identity strategy because that's going to be way too boring. But then I started thinking about my hobbies and what would I teach? What would I take of my hobbies and turn into a college course? And I thought, no, that would ruin my hobby. I'd much rather just work a little bit longer and keep my hobbies, pure. So I'm going to go with identity and access management.
Oh, that is such a lame. And I was expecting something baseball or
believe me, I thought about
money
baseball.
laundering. Something that's a little more interesting.
Those two hobbies I don't want to ruin.
Okay, well, all right. Let's see. Ian, you got me. I was originally going to go down a video game track, but I wish I could teach people to play guitar. Because I have this guitar that has been sitting in the corner of my office for a couple years now, and I can't do a darn thing with it. To be fair, I have not really invested the time into it, and I'm always looking for shortcuts. But I wish I could teach guitar because that would mean that I know how to play the guitar.
Yeah. Sweet.
So there you go. You got me on the music theory one because I do like music. I have no musical talent whatsoever, other than the jingle for this show. That is about as creative as I've gotten for anything like that. But I do listen to a lot of music. I challenge myself to try to listen to something new every week. So I'm constantly kind of evaluating and, okay, I like that. I don't like that. So I don't become one of those people.
Can you put what you listened to last week in the show notes of this one? Because I'm always looking for new stuff.
I mean, there's so much, man. I'll tell you what I have gotten into recently and kind of recently. It's not new, I would say, but The Orb and Massive Attack. So kind of from the 90s.
Like 80s, 90s.
Yeah, electronic music, a little more casual and chill. So, if you're looking for good listens, go back and listen to that stuff.
All right, back catalog work.
I mean, some of those songs have so many different layers to them that I'm constantly picking up. Oh, I never heard that before. And so I'm constantly trying to say,
Orb's Perpetual Dawn, isn't there sort of their famous track?
It is. And I think they just re-released a new version. Actually, a new video just hit YouTube of all places.
Cool.
I mean, so there's a lot to discover there. And I think, I don't want to be one of those people where I'm like, 60 or 70 and I stopped listening to music after 90s grunge, so I want to learn new stuff. So I'm with you. All right. We've been talking for an hour and 5 minutes. It always goes by so quickly with you, Ian. So I appreciate it.
And by the way, I want to say one other thing, Jeff. Teaching a class about identity and access management would not be boring. This is a fantastic topic. We just talked about it for an hour. Was it boring?
It's only podcasts that are boring that are about IAM. All right. Always leave it on a high note. We'll Costanza this thing. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. Jim, as always, thanks for your time. I will have links in our show notes to pretty much everything we talked about. Go read the stuff that Ian has been posting. It really is kind of thought-provoking stuff. And this is how these conversations and these thoughts are what leads to what's next and what you'll see in products and services, and eventually those things trickle into organizations. So I would definitely recommend that. And I did find a link for the Avoid the Noid. So you'll see a Wikipedia article for that as well. Mm-hmm. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. You can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com. Visit Ian's website, weaveidentity.com, even though it won't let me access it. Go ahead. I'm sure other people will not have the same problem that I have. All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening. And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.